Welcome to the third book of Level 2. I read it for the Bragging Rights collection. Pride and Prejudice. Fun retelling of the classic novel by Jane Austen. Pride meets Sass, Austen's iconic romance. Part 1. The Bennet family's matrimonial hype and the arrival of Mr. Bingley. We begin in a quiet English countryside in the early 19th century. Enter the Bennet family. Father Mr. Bennet, an easygoing, sarcastic man who'd rather read books than engage in drama, and Mrs. Bennet, a champion of "my daughters must marry well or we're doomed" mania. They have 5 daughters: Jane, the sweet, angelic oldest; Elizabeth, our witty protagonist, nicknamed Lizzie; Mary, bookish and awkward; Kitty, follows others' leads; and Lydia, flirty teenage whirlwind. Mrs. Bennet's entire mission in life? Marry off these girls to well-off men so they won't starve if Mr. Bennet dies. The house is entailed away to a distant cousin, which is super unfair, but hey, it's 19th century inheritance laws. She's basically a living, breathing Tinder algorithm, but for the Regency era. One day, she bursts into the drawing room announcing that a rich bachelor, Mr. Bingley, just rented Netherfield Park nearby. She's sure he's perfect husband material. She nags Mr. Bennet to go call on him, because in this era, men have to make the first official social move. Mr. Bennet plays coy, teasing his wife by refusing to say whether he's done it. Meanwhile, the daughters are all ears, particularly Jane, who's quietly hopeful, and Lizzie, who's only half enthused but curious about fresh faces in the neighborhood. Soon we learn Mr. Bennet did visit Bingley, so the Bennet clan is invited to a local ball at Meryton. This is the big chance for a first impression. Everyone's buzzing with excitement about meeting Bingley, handsome, charming, rumored to have £5,000 a year, which is a sweet chunk of change. They also hear he's bringing friends, including his sisters and some guy named Mr. Darcy, even richer. Mrs. Bennet's mind is basically double jackpot. Ball night arrives, and the Bennet sisters show up in their best gowns. Mr. Bingley turns out to be super sweet, dancing a ton, especially with Jane. They vibe instantly, like serious hard eyes. The rest of the room melts away for them. Meanwhile, Mr. Darcy stands around looking tall, handsome, and snobby. People say he's got £10,000 a year, but apparently he left his social skills at home. He refuses to dance, barely speaks, and when Bingley suggests he ask Lizzie to dance, Darcy flat out calls her tolerable, but not handsome enough to tempt me. Ouch. Lizzie overhears, shrugs it off, but internally eye rolls, labeling him Mr. Proud Jerkface. By the end of the night, the Bennet family is half excited, Jane plus Bingley equals potential love story, and half offended, Darcy's stuck-up attitude. Mrs. Bennet freaks out about the bright future for Jane, ignoring the fact that Darcy basically insulted Lizzie. This sets the stage. Bingley equals sunshine, Darcy equals dark cloud. Lizzie's curiosity is piqued, though. Is Darcy truly that rude, or is there more to him? Part 2. Bingley's courtship, Darcy's frosty attitude, and town gossips. After that ball, the Bennet household hums with talk of Bingley. Jane is smitten. He keeps showing up at Netherfield with a big smile, inviting Jane to small gatherings, praising her angelic nature. Meanwhile, Darcy is forced to socialize in the same circles. He's still standoffish, but occasionally his eyes linger on Lizzie. She catches him staring sometimes and is like, "Why is the proud jerk looking at me?" Mrs. Bennet is in overdrive. She orchestrates ways for Jane to see Bingley. For instance, she sends Jane to Netherfield in the rain, hoping she'll be forced to stay overnight. It works. Jane catches a cold and must remain at Netherfield to recover for a few days, giving Bingley extra time to fuss over her. Lizzie walks 3 miles in muddy fields to check on her sister, shocking Bingley's snobby sisters, Miss Bingley and Mrs. Hurst, who think such an act is unladylike. Darcy, oddly enough, admires Lizzie's spirited independence, though outwardly he's still grumpy. During these visits, Miss Bingley tries to flirt with Darcy. She's aiming for marriage with the biggest bank account. Darcy politely tolerates her compliments, but he's more intrigued by Lizzie's quick wit. The tension grows. Lizzie thinks Darcy is arrogant. Darcy's fighting an internal battle. He knows he's drawn to Lizzie but can't stand her inferior social connections. Meanwhile, the Bennet family's less flattering members keep making awkward impressions. For instance, Mrs. Bennet brags loudly about Jane's beauty, not so subtly hinting Bingley should propose. Younger sisters Kitty and Lydia giggle about local militia officers, focusing on Mr. Wickham, a charming soldier who appears in town. He's got a sweet smile, a flattering manner, and Lizzie finds him refreshing. Then it turns out Wickham has beef with Darcy, hinting that Darcy wronged him in the past. Lizzie, loving a good Darcy-bashing story, eagerly believes Wickham's side. So the local gossips go wild. Darcy cheated Wickham out of some inheritance. Everyone's like, ugh, Darcy's the worst. Lizzie's prejudice against Darcy cements further. Meanwhile, Jane tries to stay neutral, assuming there's some misunderstanding. But Lizzie's on a roll, further convinced Darcy's proud and immoral. At a subsequent ball at Netherfield, tensions run high. Darcy surprisingly asks Lizzie for a dance. She's forced to accept polite society rules. The dance is full of banter, half flirty, half antagonistic. She brings up Wickham. Darcy goes tense. Miss Bingley snipes at Lizzie. All in all, it's a swirling social mess. Bingley, oblivious to drama, is too busy gazing adoringly at Jane. Mrs. Bennet, of course, crows about an impending engagement, making Darcy and the Bingley sisters cringe at the Bennet family's lack of decorum. By the end, Lizzie's convinced Darcy is a jerk who destroyed Wickham's life, while Darcy's forcibly acknowledging his attraction to a woman whose family is, in his eyes, borderline embarrassing. And somewhere in the background, we have more comedic chaos waiting, like the arrival of a certain cousin Mr. Collins. Part 3. The obnoxious Mr. Collins and Charlotte's surprise move. Enter Mr. Collins, a pompous, long-winded clergyman who's set to inherit the Bennet property, Longbourn, upon Mr. Bennet's death. He writes a letter announcing he'll visit to mend fences. Mrs. Bennet's immediate thought, maybe he'll marry one of the daughters, so the estate stays in the family. Win-win. But Collins is, well, cringe. He worships his wealthy patroness, Lady Catherine de Bourgh, name-dropping her every second. He's also determined to get a wife, specifically from among his fair cousins, to show generosity. At dinner, Collins spouts pompous compliments to the Bennets, then fixates on Jane, until he notices she's likely spoken for by Bingley. So next, he zeroes in on Lizzie as his next best choice. The poor girl is mortified by his tedious chatter, but Mrs. Bennet encourages him anyway. She wants at least one daughter locked into a safe marriage, even if it's Collins. Lizzie's like, I'd rather die. Collins, oblivious to social cues, proposes to her in the living room, with the worst pitch ever, your family will be kicked out if you don't marry me, and Lady Catherine recommends I marry quickly. Lizzie politely but firmly refuses. He assumes she's playing hard to get. She's not. Mrs. Bennet freaks out, tries to force Lizzie to accept. Mr. Bennet intervenes with a savage line, if you don't marry Mr. Collins, your mother will never speak to you again, but if you do marry him, I'll never speak to you again. Lizzie's safe from that horror show, but the tension spikes. Meanwhile, Mr. Collins is offended, quickly shifting his attention to Lizzie's best friend, Charlotte Lucas, a practical 27-year-old who's not big on romance illusions. She sees that marrying Collins would provide her security. So after a short acquaintance, Charlotte accepts Mr. Collins's proposal. Lizzie is shocked. Her best friend with that buffoon? Charlotte calmly explains, look, I'm not gorgeous or wealthy, and I want a decent home. This is my best shot. Lizzie feels sad and a bit betrayed, but she can't deny Charlotte's logic. Mrs. Bennet's furious that the estate won't remain in her direct line if Collins is married to Charlotte, but what can she do? Meanwhile, Jane's relationship with Bingley continues, but his sisters and Darcy begin to worry that the Bennet family is too embarrassing, plus they're not sure if Jane truly loves him. She's polite but not super demonstrative. Next thing you know, Bingley and his sisters vanish to London with little explanation. Jane's left heartbroken. She's invited to stay with relatives in London, hoping maybe to see Bingley. Darcy is also in London, presumably meddling behind the scenes. Lizzie's suspicion grows. Is Darcy the reason Bingley ghosted Jane? So in short, Mr. Collins is off to marry Charlotte. Jane is sad. Lizzie is furious at Darcy. The Bennet household is in meltdown mode, though Lydia and Kitty remain oblivious, chasing militia officers. This saga is about to move to new locations and new drama, with Darcy continuing to loom large in Lizzie's mind. Part 4. Elizabeth's visit to Charlotte, Rosings Park, and uncomfortable Darcy encounters. Months pass. Elizabeth gets an invitation from Charlotte, now Mrs. Collins, to visit them in their new home near Rosings Park, the estate of Lady Catherine de Bourgh, Mr. Collins's revered patroness. Lizzie's like, sure, I'll check on my friend, plus I want a change of scenery. So she travels there, stopping en route to see her aunt and uncle, the Gardiners, who also show her a good time. Jane, on the other hand, is chilling in London with their Aunt Gardiner, occasionally trying to see Bingley but getting snubbed by his snooty sisters. Once Lizzie arrives at the parsonage where Charlotte and Collins live, she tries not to roll her eyes at Collins's endless bragging. Charlotte seems content enough. She's managed to create a system where Collins does his own weird routine, and she's got her private space. Soon, they're invited to Rosings Park for dinner. Lady Catherine is Darcy's wealthy aunt, known to be bossy and intrusive. She interrogates Lizzie about her family, her piano skills, everything. It's awkward, but Lizzie's witty comebacks amuse Darcy's cousin, Colonel Fitzwilliam, who's also visiting. Wait, Darcy's here too? Yup. He's at Rosings, visiting his aunt. Lizzie's not expecting him, so it's a shock. He's still stiff and formal, but now he keeps popping up, dropping by the parsonage unannounced, showing up in the same walking paths Lizzie takes. She's suspicious, like, why is he always around? Is he checking on me or trying to intimidate me? Darcy, for his part, is torn between his attraction to Lizzie and his belief that she's beneath him socially. One day, Colonel Fitzwilliam chats casually with Lizzie and inadvertently mentions that Darcy recently saved a friend from an imprudent marriage. That friend is obviously Bingley. Lizzie's blood boils. This confirms Darcy meddled, effectively separating Bingley from Jane. Furious, Lizzie decides Darcy is a callous elitist who messed up her sister's happiness. Then Darcy visits Lizzie alone at the parsonage, looking tense. Out of nowhere, he blurts a proposal. I love you, but also it's a struggle because your family is so embarrassing. Yet I can't help it. Will you marry me? Talk about an unromantic pitch. Lizzie's outraged. She blasts him for insulting her family while proposing. Plus, she accuses him of ruining Jane's prospects with Bingley, and also mentions the whole Wickham fiasco. Darcy's shocked. He defends himself about Wickham, but is stung by her refusal. He leaves, reeling. Lizzie's left trembling. This guy, who she's sworn to hate, just confessed love, yet also dissed her background. She's not even flattered. She's just furious, feeling justified in rejecting him. So Darcy's first proposal ends in flames, setting the stage for revelations and introspection. Next up, Darcy's side of the story is about to come out, flipping Lizzie's assumptions upside down. Part 5. Darcy's letter and Elizabeth's perspective shift. The morning after the disastrous proposal, Darcy intercepts Lizzie during her walk. He hands her a letter, bows stiffly, and leaves. She opens it with trembling hands, expecting more condescending nonsense. Instead, it's a heartfelt explanation for two major accusations. Breaking up Bingley and Jane. Darcy admits he did advise Bingley to step back, but only because he believed Jane wasn't truly in love. Her calm demeanor made Darcy think Jane was indifferent, plus the Bennet family's cringy behavior, Mrs. Bennet's loud matchmaking, younger sisters giggling at officers, made Darcy fear Bingley would regret the match. He insists he was protecting his friend, not out of malice. He confesses ignorance of Jane's real feelings, and now regrets if he misjudged her. Wickham. Darcy reveals that Wickham is a manipulative liar. Darcy's father had left Wickham a living in the church, but Wickham blew the money gambling and later tried to elope with Darcy's teenage sister, Georgiana, to snatch her inheritance. Darcy saved Georgiana from scandal. That's why he despises Wickham. Wickham's sob story about inheritance was fake. Lizzie is floored. She rereads the letter multiple times. Memories start surfacing that align with Darcy's account, Wickham's shifty manner, Darcy's protective stance around Georgiana, etc. She realizes she was too quick to believe Wickham's version. As for Jane and Bingley, Lizzie sees how her mother and siblings might have embarrassed them, and how Jane's reserved expression could be mistaken for lack of affection. Guilt washes over her. She's been so prejudiced. Darcy's letter cracks her pride. Still, she's not fully excusing Darcy's snobbery, but she acknowledges she's misjudged him, especially regarding Wickham. Feeling raw and introspective, Lizzie decides to keep this letter secret, telling no one. Soon, Darcy and Colonel Fitzwilliam leave Rosings. Lizzie departs the parsonage, heading home via visits with her aunt and uncle, the Gardiners. She can't stop replaying Darcy's confession in her mind. Her dislike is mixed with uneasy admiration. She regrets her harsh words. Maybe she was too savage, but there's no going back now. Her biggest concern, what about Jane? She's still in London, trying to see if Bingley cares. Darcy's letter implies he might still care, but he's been told to step away. Lizzie wonders if they'll ever reconnect. At home, Lizzie finds the Bennet house in typical chaos. Mrs. Bennet's whining about the lack of proposals, Lydia is super hyped about going to Brighton with the militia, they're relocating, and Wickham's still floating around, charming people. Lizzie now sees him as a fraud, but can't publicly expose him without revealing Darcy's letter. She warns her father not to let Lydia go to Brighton, she's too wild and naive, but he dismisses her concerns. So Lydia heads off, excited to flirt with officers. Lizzie's powerless to stop it. She's left uneasy, with that letter's revelations swirling in her head. Part 6. Summer trip with the Gardiners, Pemberley visit, and a nicer Darcy. Time for Lizzie's getaway with her aunt and Uncle Gardiner. The plan, a tour of the countryside, including Derbyshire. Lizzie's slightly anxious because Derbyshire is Darcy's turf. His grand estate, Pemberley, is there. She initially wants to skip it, but the Gardiners talk her into visiting Pemberley's famous grounds, assured Darcy's out of town. Lizzie's curiosity wins. They arrive at Pemberley and are wowed by the grandeur, rolling lawns, a stately mansion, a river, a sense of refined taste that screams Darcy. A housekeeper gives them a tour, praising Darcy as the best master ever, surprisingly kind and generous. Lizzie's stunned by these positive reviews. She feels twinges of regret for labeling him a jerk. Suddenly, Darcy himself appears. Lizzie practically has a heart attack. He was supposed to come tomorrow, not today. Instead of being awkward or snobby, Darcy is polite, even warm. He chats with the Gardiners, inquiring about Lizzie's family. He invites them to meet his sister, Georgiana Darcy, which is huge, because Georgiana is shy. Lizzie's astonished at Darcy's change in demeanor, relaxed, gracious, no biting remarks. Next day, Darcy and Georgiana host them. Georgiana is sweet but timid, looking up to her brother. She clearly respects Lizzie as Darcy's friend. They play piano chat. Bingley even shows up, super friendly. Lizzie sees him and thinks of Jane, biting her tongue not to mention anything. Meanwhile, Miss Bingley is around, throwing shade at Lizzie, but Darcy no longer plays along. He's clearly smitten, not caring about class differences. Lizzie's delight in Darcy's improved manners soars. She's thinking, could I actually like him romantically? She's almost giddy. But then when bad news arrives, a letter from home states Lydia has run off with Wickham and no one knows where they are. It's scandalous because if they're not married, Lydia's reputation is ruined, and so is the entire Bennet family's. Lizzie panics. She confesses the situation to Darcy in a tearful moment, feeling mortified that her family drama is on display. Darcy is visibly shaken, regrets not exposing Wickham earlier. Lizzie rushes off with the Gardiners to handle the crisis. She laments that this scandal will destroy any chance Darcy might still fancy her. Because in polite society, a family scandal is a huge no-no. She's a mess of worry about Lydia's future, shame for her family, and heartbreak that her new positive dynamic with Darcy might be lost. And so the sweet vibe from Pemberley is shattered by Lydia's reckless escapade. Lizzie returns home bracing for the worst. Her mother is hysterical, father is furious, and they're searching London for Lydia. Meanwhile, Wickham's shady behavior is proven. It looks bleak. Lizzie believes Darcy will wash his hands of her now, but fate might have other plans behind the scenes. Part 7. Lydia and Wickham found. Darcy's secret intervention. Chaos reigns at the Bennet household. Mr. Bennet went to London to search for Lydia, but he's making no progress. Everyone's freaking out, imagining Lydia's disgrace. Then a letter from Mr. Gardiner arrives. Lydia and Wickham are found. They're about to be married. Wait, marriage? How did that happen, given Wickham has no money and Lydia's scandalized? The letter suggests Mr. Gardiner negotiated the wedding terms, paying Wickham's debts and securing a small settlement, but it's hush-hush about who put up the real cash. Everyone assumes Mr. Gardiner footed the bill out of kindness. Mrs. Bennet rejoices that Lydia won't be ruined, ignoring the fact that Wickham is basically forced into it for financial reasons. The newlyweds pop by the Bennet house briefly, Lydia giddy, Wickham smirking. Lizzie notices Lydia bragging that Mr. Darcy was at her wedding. Wait, Darcy was there? Lizzie corners Lydia, who lets slip that Darcy was the one who discovered them, arranged the marriage, and presumably paid off Wickham's debts. She's not supposed to mention it, but Lydia can't keep secrets. Lizzie is floored. Darcy did all that to save the Bennets from disgrace? Meanwhile, a letter from Mrs. Gardiner confirms it. Darcy took the lead, found the couple, negotiated everything. He insisted on keeping his involvement secret. Lizzie's overwhelmed by gratitude and admiration. Her feelings pivot from he's a jerk to he's unbelievably selfless. Now the crisis is somewhat contained. Lydia's married, though it's not a great match realistically. Social destruction is averted. Lizzie wonders if Darcy's sense of responsibility toward her, or regret over not exposing Wickham sooner, pushed him to fix it. And how does this affect their relationship going forward? Jane is relieved about the scandal dissolving, but she's still heartbroken that Bingley never returned. Then out of the blue, Bingley and Darcy show up at Netherfield again. It's rumored they're just there for shooting season, but obviously there's more going on. The Bennet family reacts in typical fashion. Mrs. Bennet reverts to her old ways of throwing subtle and not-so-subtle hints. Lizzie's heart pounds when she sees Darcy again, unsure how to express her gratitude. Bingley, braver now, maybe Darcy's given him the green light, calls often, flirts with Jane, and eventually proposes. Jane is over the moon, accepting with her gentle smile. The Bennet parents are ecstatic. This overshadowing joyous moment means Lizzie doesn't immediately corner Darcy about the Lydia rescue, but she's definitely itching to see if Darcy's feelings remain, or if he's done with the Bennets. So the Bennet family celebrates Jane's engagement. Meanwhile, Lizzie's emotional swirl intensifies. Darcy's heroic behind-the-scenes move, plus his changed behavior, has her smitten. She's praying he might propose again, but she's not sure if he will. The story's final act is about to unfold, with Lady Catherine's meddling cameo and Darcy's second shot at love. Part 8. Lady Catherine's interference and Darcy's second proposal. While Jane and Bingley's engagement bliss covers the Bennet household, Lady Catherine de Bourgh suddenly arrives for a surprise visit. She storms in, demanding a private audience with Lizzie. The reason? Rumors reached her that Darcy might marry Lizzie, and Lady Catherine is outraged. She has always planned Darcy to marry her own daughter, his cousin apparently, so she deems Lizzie unworthy. She insists Lizzie promise never to accept Darcy. Lizzie, proud and protective of her own free will, refuses to make such a vow. She basically says, "Mind your business, lady." Lady Catherine leaves in a huff, threatening dire consequences. This confrontation ironically boosts Lizzie's hope. Why would Lady Catherine be so upset if Darcy wasn't seriously considering her? Sure enough, Darcy hears from his aunt, guesses Lizzie didn't cave. Soon after, Darcy and Bingley come to the Bennet house again. Bingley is all about Jane. Darcy lingers, barely speaking. Lizzie and Darcy manage a private walk. Darcy awkwardly says he won't repeat his proposal unless she wants him to, referencing their last disastrous talk. She confesses her changed feelings, apologizing for her harshness, thanking him for Lydia's rescue. Darcy, relieved, proposes again, this time more humbly, and Lizzie says yes. It's a gentle, heartfelt moment, overshadowed by no snobbery or misunderstandings. They walk back, engaged. The Bennet family is flabbergasted. Mrs. Bennet nearly collapses in joy upon hearing Darcy's 10,000 a year. Mr. Bennet is initially incredulous. "But I thought you hated him?" Lizzie explains how Darcy's proven his worth. Mr. Bennet, concerned about Lizzie's genuine happiness, is reassured by her sincerity. Lydia is cluelessly unimpressed. She only cares about her own marriage gossip. Jane is delighted, and Bingley offers a big bro hug to Darcy, happy that both couples can live near each other. News spreads. The Meryton townsfolk do a collective jaw drop that Darcy is marrying a girl they once saw as meh. Lady Catherine eventually simmers down, though she's salty about Darcy defying her plan. Georgiana Darcy is thrilled to have Lizzie as a sister-in-law. Meanwhile, Miss Bingley tries to mask her jealousy. Thus the ultimate couple is formed. Darcy, tamed from his pride, and Lizzie, freed from her prejudice. They overcame social judgments, family embarrassments, a manipulative Wickham, and a meddling Lady Catherine. The only thing left is the final wedding and the happily ever after. But let's wrap up with a quick reflection on everyone's futures. Part 9. Double weddings, future bliss, and the last word on Pride and Prejudice. The closing chapters see the Bennet household erupt in wedding prep mania. We have two big couples, Jane and Bingley, plus Lizzie and Darcy. Mrs. Bennet is in heaven. Two wealthy sons-in-law, meaning she basically hit the matrimonial jackpot. Mr. Bennet just wants peace in his library but is genuinely happy for his two beloved daughters who found real love, not just financial matches. The weddings are likely grand events, though Austen doesn't dwell on details. Bingley and Jane eventually move to a nearby estate, so they're close to her family. Jane remains her sweet self. Bingley remains the affable puppy dog. They'll presumably have a gentle, loving household, free from drama. Lizzie and Darcy head to Pemberley, that beautiful estate Lizzie once toured as a visitor. Now she's mistress of it. She settles in well, charming the servants who adore Darcy, forging a sweet sisterly bond with Georgiana. Darcy continues to show a warmer, more open personality, especially around Lizzie. They banter, read, host parties, and occasionally invite the gardeners, whom Darcy respects for their kindness and good sense. His old pride is tempered by Lizzie's wit. Her old prejudice is replaced by deeper understanding. As for other players, Wickham and Lydia remain a train wreck, living beyond their means, sponging off relatives. Darcy helps them from time to time for Lizzie's sake, but there's no illusions about Wickham's nature. Kitty matures a bit, less under Lydia's influence. Mary keeps being Mary, focusing on moral essays. Lady Catherine eventually tolerates the marriage, though never stops being bossy. Miss Bingley outwardly congratulates them, inwardly bummed she didn't snag Darcy. But hey, life moves on. In essence, everyone ends where they should. The novel's final message? Pride and Prejudice. Darcy's pride in his superior rank, Lizzie's prejudice based on first impressions, almost ruined a great match. But genuine self-reflection overcame it. Love triumphs, tempered by humility and mutual respect. Austen's comedic lens also reveals the quirks of Regency society, the obsession with marriage as economic survival, the delicate dances at balls, the comedic meddling of mothers and aristocratic aunts. Pride and Prejudice endures as a beloved romance because it's not just about swirling dresses and witty banter, it's about learning to see beyond one's narrow viewpoint. Darcy and Lizzie's story resonates. We all have snap judgments. We all have pride in some form. The novel says, take a second look. People can surprise you if you let them. Also, having a best friend or sister to confide in helps, and occasionally a comedic mother or meddling aunt can spice things up. So we leave Lizzie at Pemberley, laughing with Darcy about the wild journey from tolerable but not handsome enough to my beloved wife. Jane and Bingley giggle in their cozy estate next door. Mrs. Bennet relaxes, job done. The community keeps gossiping. And that, dear friends, is the comedic, timeless, sweet story of Pride and Prejudice, reimagined in dorm lounge style. You unraveled the romance and drama of Pride and Prejudice with all the poise of a Regency-era hero. Time to celebrate your triumph. Up next is The Scarlet Letter. Forbidden love, hidden guilt, and a heroine who stands tall against judgment. This tale of love and defiance will keep you hooked. Also, don't forget to smash that subscribe button and ring the bell to stay in the loop for all our epic content. And guess what? A new fun retelling audiobook drops every single weekday.